In the last lecture, we learned how to use nested routes. Now you might have noticed one thing, maybe even earlier. When we are on a given post and we click on a different post, we don't actually load that, though you can see in the URL that the ID changes. So it is registering the click, but it isn't loading the new component. Now, the reason for this is that React Router behind the scenes doesn't replace the component all the time. If you're loading a component on which you're already on, like we are here, it won't re-render the whole component, and therefore for the full post, component did mount isn't executed again. Because why would it do that? The component itself didn't change. It would be very inefficient to unmount it and remount it. So since component did mount isn't executed again though, we're not reaching out to the web again. So to fix this, what we should do is we should also implement component did update to handle this case, because did update will be executed again. And I will add a new method, load data, a convenience method, which will simply hold my old code here where I reach out to the web and load my data. Because now I want to call this both in component did mount and component did update. So this load data will be called in both lifecycle hooks so that I'm prepared both for the first time this single post gets loaded and the second time. Now, however, you see by the console log already, we have an infinite loop. So this is not the perfect solution. I click on a link here and it keeps on loading again. So definitely not what we want to do. What's wrong with our current setup here? Well, it's our check in load data. We're checking if our ID changed and we're checking for this props ID. Now, just as everywhere else here, this needs to be this props match params ID. This props ID will never be set. So we had the same infinite loop problem we had in the HTTP section because our check here wasn't working anymore. And we not only need to update this here, we need to update it everywhere in this component where we reference this props ID. Of course, also here, otherwise deleting would never work. And of course, also down here where we check if the ID is set. Now, with all these changes in place, it would still not work because the ID we're retrieving from the route params is actually going to be a string. Now, here we're checking for type equality too, and the ID stored in the loaded post actually is a number. So we either have to convert the string ID to a number or simply turn this into a check where we just check for the value. Now, if we check just for the value and we click a post, now you see it's not loading all the time. Instead, it only loads once, but it correctly updates it when we switch the post. Again, the alternative would be to leave the type equality check, but convert this into a number by adding a plus in front of it, for example. Now, again, if I click on a post, we load it only once, we don't enter the infinite loop. This is an important fix to the full post component in general, that we use match params ID all over in the component. And it's also important to understand that you need to handle changes in component did update if the post component or if the component in general is already loaded through routing, because the router will not unmount the old one and mount the same one again with different data. It will reuse the old one and just adjust the route parameter. It's your job to react to this new parameter, and you can react to that in component did update, which will be called because the props changed. You receive a new props with a new match object, with a new params object, with the new ID. This is what's happening here. This is what we're taking advantage of. And this is important to understand when working with nested routes.